Hello my friends, my family, of course esteemed colleagues. Today we are going to demystify triglycerides or triglycerides. Now what do I mean by demystify? Well, I guess almost anyone that has high triglycerides and deals with their doctor, they will sooner or later hear their doctor say, well, I don't understand, how come you have such a high triglycerides? My wife, she was skinny when I met her, 37, 36 years old, and her triglycerides were high. And doctors always have the same comment to do, and this is you cannot eat pork and keep away from eggs because your triglycerides are high. Well, let me give you one great advice. If your doctor tells you, if you have high triglycerides, elevated, and your doctor tells you you have to stay away from pork or from eggs or fatty food, turn around and run, because this doctor has absolutely no clue about how the body works, and there is no way that he can help you no matter what. So look somewhere else. Now, if somebody doesn't eat meat, doesn't eat fatty meat, doesn't eat eggs, how come they can have high triglycerides? Actually, people who have high triglycerides often do not eat much meat. They eat basically vegetarian food or combination, like a little bit of meat and a lot of potatoes or pasta. So how come their triglycerides are high? Again, we have to back away from school books. And anyone who is colleague here and slightly lost on this matter, I understand it, because this is exactly stuff that they tell us in a medical school. I know there are a couple, or maybe more, medical students who are watching my videos and reading my blog. So let's demystify triglycerides. I have mentioned it separately when I spoke about glucose, but here we are just going to talk about triglyceride, try to make it not too long. So what happens when we eat fatty food? Let's say fatty pork. Well, the fat is mostly triglyceride, but in digestion, inside of the stomach, under influence of strong hydrochloric acid, stuff breaks down into mush, and basically you are going to have fatty acids and proteins which will be absorbed into the wall of intestines. Then intestines basically cannot just shoot these fatty acids in the blood, because as we know, you put fat in the water, and blood is basically water plasma. You put fat in the water and it clogs up, okay? And it goes to the surface and it really cannot be dispersed. And it could make harm because it can block some small arteries, cause strokes. So if before the fat can even hit the bloodstream, it has to be dealt with. Now we are always focusing what they are telling us in a school, liver does all that stuff. Liver does it if it has to. But when we are eating, these fatty acids, before they can be put in the bloodstream, they have to be dispersed. So the cells, before converting the stuff, they are going to fill the cellular demand of the body. So if some cells in the body are demanding cholesterol because they need to repair something, then first these fatty acids are going to be bound to protein and sent in the bloodstream to find the host that needs them. Now leftover fatty acids, they have to be dealt with, and since our body uses fat as energy, then what is being done inside of the intestine, the fatty acids are bonded with glycerol, 3 fatty acids to 1 molecule of glycerol, and that's why we call them triglycerides. And they are pushed in the bloodstream. Now, if the cells need energy, they are going to absorb it, or they absorb whatever they need, and the rest, it is going to be deposited in adipose, or we call it fatty tissue, and wait there for a time when we are not eating, and cells demand energy. Then from adipose tissue, in a form of triglycerides again, the fat goes in a stream and finds the host that needs them and is being used to produce energy. Now, if this works like this, how come that we get high triglycerides? One would say, well, after you eat. You may have elevated triglycerides after you eat, especially after you eat very fatty food, but not for long, because what is in the blood, then it quickly is going to be stored. Whenever we are taking blood for examination, we are doing it on empty stomach or in the morning, so we know the true values. So there is no way, if triglycerides are high, from what? You didn't eat, you didn't make them. What happened? Well, actually, the story gets slightly different. People who are glucoholics, that have changed their body, their cells, to run on glucose because they consume it daily and in high quantities. What happens? Small amount of glucose is being used for cellular food during time that we have our meal, and cells get charged very quickly, and the rest of glucose cannot be stored as a glucose because we have no storages of sugar. Don't be confused here with glycogen. That's a separate story. So what happened is that every excess, whenever you have too much of glucose in the blood, then, and same is if fructose comes, then liver has to convert them into fat. And it converts them into fat, and then, again, before putting them in a stream, it has to bond them to either protein, if there is a necessity for cholesterol, or bonds them to glycerol, makes triglycerides, and pushes them in the bloodstream to be stored or used. Now, glucoholics, So people that eat a lot of carbohydrates, and that eat carbohydrates basically, even cooked plants are in this category. But more of starches, more of dietary glucose that you consume, higher absorption of it, more comes into the blood, and you are producing more fats, but not in the intestines, because sugar is absorbed and glucose is absorbed as a glucose and put in a stream. So here you are relieving intestines of doing this job. So the whole rigmarole with fat is now left to liver. And if we eat a lot of these big portions of carbohydrate or dietary glucose, then and absorption is high because we are doing it for a while, what is happening? We are producing a lot of fat and uric acid, because uric acid is a byproduct of this production of fat, transformation of glucose into the fat. So we are producing a lot of fat in a speed faster than liver can bond it to triglyceride and send it into the blood, and you end up with fatty liver. Very simple explanation. But now, since you are glucoholic and you are getting fat because of carbohydrates, because you are producing a lot of fat, your cells cannot burn all this glucose that you are eating. And more glucose comes, less mitochondria you will have in the cells, which means less fat you will be able to process. You will be geared strictly to glucose. So if you are not eating and your cells need energy, which is basically 1 hour after you have eaten or earlier, all of a sudden you are hungry, so your cells demand food, and the body has no glucose to give, so sends triglyceride. So triglycerides come, and cell cannot produce enough of energy, because instead of 2,000 mitochondria, it has 500. 1/4 of what it needs to produce enough energy from fat. And since it cannot cope with the demand, it sends message, leptin, hey, send me some more food. And what happens? Body sends more triglycerides. So we have now double dose of triglycerides, which means absolutely nothing to the cells because they don't have enough mitochondria. So they are crying for more food. So body sends another shot of triglycerides. So your triglycerides in the blood are rising and rising and rising because your cells are unable to use them, unable to produce enough energy. They are starving because they don't have enough mitochondria to produce this energy. Because the whole metabolism, cellular, was geared now to glucose that you don't store. It's not your food. It's a plant food. So if you come to doctor, and usually these people are obese because they simply absorb too much glucose, they produce a lot of fat and they cannot use it, so it just keeps building up. And of course doctor sees you and maybe cheeseburger, hamburger, something, maybe too many pork ribs, keep away from pork, keep away from eggs. This doctor absolutely has no clue. And unfortunately, I would say 90% of doctors do not know the truth. Because this is not how we have been told or how we have been explained things happen. Because in medical school, they are preaching that our cells run on sugar, which is completely wrong. The only sugar that cells can reach and make energy would be glucose from glycogen. And the only tissues that have glycogen are muscles and brain. Brain, in a stress situation, fighting for life, brain has to make quick decisions and muscles have to execute them. And then they cannot push glucose into the blood. If stress may last a little longer, that's why liver will break down its glycogen, and liver can shoot sugar into bloodstream. And as soon as level of sugar rises, cells still cannot take it, because normally cells take sugar through transporter, through GLUT. So there is no need for insulin. And they take it only to make amino acids, to build proteins. That's primary reason why we have sugar. And body makes exactly amount of sugar as it needs. Liver does it and sends it into the stream when necessary. But if it sends too much because glycogen was used, as soon as level of sugar rises, now pancreas has to shoot insulin to force cells to absorb it. Only in this way cells can receive enough sugar that can actually produce some energy. Through mechanism of transporting mechanism, it can't. It's way too, even in high absorption, it's still not enough. It needs this insulin. Normally, if you eat correctly, you never have insulin in the blood unless you are in a stress situation, which should be very seldom. And in this way, it doesn't harm you. But daily, being like in a stress situation, because you have high level of sugar and you are forced to shoot insulin in the blood several times a day after every meal you take. And another thing is that if you are glucoholic, because of this need of sugar, of glucose that you don't store, so you cannot provide it only when you are eating, now your meals have to become frequent. 3, 4, 5 meals a day, so every 2 hours you can put something in the mouth to boost the power, because you are running on a fuel that you cannot store. So anybody with little bit of brain still working can clearly see that sugar in no way, shape can be the primary fuel for our cells. Fat is always available, even when you are sleeping. Glucose not, only when you are eating. Or if you are in a stress from glycogen, but it's small amount, you run out of it in 20 minutes, and then you go into hypoglycemia. So anybody that ever confronts me, and usually those are vegans and vegetarians, they say, glucose, the glycogen is our glucose. Yeah, but only for stress. I hope that you understand now the problem with triglycerides. Unless you change diet or reduce amount of carbohydrates that you are eating. Vegans usually don't have a problem with this because they eat little amount. Little bit of rice, a little bit of processed and cooked carbohydrate, which is a dietary carbohydrate, and mostly raw vegetables. So it takes much longer for the body to experience problem. The only thing is that because most vegetables have toxic phytoproteins that prevent cellular hydration. After, that could be 10, 15 years, all of a sudden, bingo, starts problem, and when problem starts in whole body, because all cells are highly toxic, because for 15 years they could not properly hydrate or detoxify, since there was always toxic stuff in the blood that prevented hydration. But this is, I see it because people contact me. First they are laughing, and then a few years later they go, "Oh, Darko, sorry, what can I do now?" So this is how it works. Don't be fooled. Yes, you say, "Oh, people are joking. I hear cats. Somebody is killing cats, torturing cats." Nobody here eats cats. And yes, I eat meat, but once when you eat correctly, I have maybe 250 grams of meat every other day, because I don't eat every day. Today I'm just on bananas, only just to put something in the stomach that doesn't give me any nourishment, because when they are raw, they are teaser. They just go through the system. I have them just for taste. So when you eat correctly, you eat small amounts. 2 eggs may sustain me all day. Only during the cleansing process, yeah, your body needs a lot of energy and a lot of material to repair for reparations. So you need it. But otherwise, remember, triglycerides have nothing to do with eating meat or eggs. Problem with triglycerides is always because of dietary glucose. Always. I hope you get the drift. Love you all. Until next time.